Hello, this is Eastern Europe Review, the common project of BELSAT and TVP World, with the reports and analysis from Ukraine, Belarus and Russia. I'm Alexandra Shapalina, and these are the main stories. Why did the Lukashenka Special Services stage a poorly directed, bogus terrorist attack in Hrodna?
This story, among other things, showed how important it is to have some institutions which, in such a critical situation, can help resist propaganda.
A historic moment. 17 Ukrainian children captured by the Russian occupants have returned to their motherland.
They forced us to wake up to the anthem of the Russian Federation.
An exodus of Russian citizens from Buryats to Mongolia while the Russian-Ukrainian war continues.
I packed my things and left without thinking for long.
The Lukashenka regime special forces allegedly killed a foreign terrorist. According to the official version, a man with a fake Russian passport entered the territory of Belarus for a series of terrorist attacks in Hrodna. It took literally a few hours to discredit this version. The materials published by the propaganda are proof that the whole operation was a fake created by the regime itself. Why would Lukashenko invent a story about a foreign terrorist, and how successful his special services are in staging such acts?
As I always say, it's not the time to rest.
Here, the dictator Alexander Lukashenko is at a meeting with the special forces, where he once again boasts about achievements, this time about shooting a very dangerous and armed foreign terrorist. According to the propaganda version, the man with a forged passport, issued in the name of Alexei Lomakin, bought materials for making explosives in stores and went to a forest to retrieve weapons from shelters. He was allegedly going to blow up the buildings of special forces in Hrodna.
The special services worked brilliantly. They seized an arsenal of weapons and explosives intended for high-profile terrorist attacks against citizens and officials.
However, BIPOL, which unites Belarusian security forces in exile, and the group of anonymous hacker activists Kyberpartizani, immediately responded to the story created by the regime. After the material was released on state television, it took them just a few hours to discover that the alleged Russian citizen Lomakin, who came from St. Petersburg to commit the terrorist attacks, was in fact an employee of the KGB, Zakharov. Moreover, the materials shown by the propaganda are unconvincing. The first thing that catches one's attention is the appearance of the alleged terrorist.
As for the appearance of the man being watched, his disguise is reminiscent of the 60s. First of all, the hairstyle is most likely a wig, which doesn't correspond to modern times. Coloured glasses frames attract attention, and I wonder, what kind of terrorist or saboteur who wants to commit a crime stands out in a crowd like that? On the contrary, he must blend in with the crowd.
The quality of the recording also attracts attention. The recordings from what seems to be a video surveillance camera look as if they were taken by a professional video camera. In addition, if the terrorist was closely watched before liquidation, why was so much force and equipment used during the entry to the apartment?
The force and means used are inadequate for the potential danger, for a simple reason. They had a recognized apartment, a recognized man who could be there. It looks like a hurricane passed through there, and not special services. Even if they had used noise or gas grenades, there wouldn't have been such damage.
The so-called Lomakin allegedly threw an F1 grenade at the security forces, but none of them was injured during the operation. Propaganda showed the moment of the explosion not in the middle of the apartment, but outside, as if it was staged and everyone was waiting for the grenade to explode.
The state will never eliminate a person who prepared a terrorist attack. He can reveal the entire web, who prepared it, where and how.
The official version of the incident emphasizes the terrorists' connection with those who left the country due to repression or use the white-red-white flag, which is a symbol of resistance to the state. This is how the state wants to denigrate its opponents and justify the level of repression.
This story, among other things, showed how important it is to have some institutions which, in such a critical situation, can help resist propaganda. In any normal country, they are part of the state, and in our country, they are part of the resistance to the state. It's Kyberpartizani and BIPOL who can quickly find evidence.
The main goal of staging the entire action can be to cover up the previous defeats of Lukashenka's security forces and special services, the attack of Belarusian partisans' drones on a Russian plane, and the detention of Russian saboteurs with Belarusian citizenship in Poland.
On 22nd of March, 17 Ukrainian children that had been deported by Russia to temporarily occupied territories were returned to Ukraine. The evacuation was conducted by the Save Ukraine Charitable Foundation. Our journalist accompanied the children that had been forced to part with their relatives for more than 6 months when they were finally reunited with their parents. How many deported young Ukrainians still remain in Russia? Details in our report.
Denis Zaporozhenko came to Kiev from Kherson just for this moment. He hugs his 3 children tightly, 2 daughters aged 14 and 11, and his 10-year-old son. The man was not able to see them for more than 6 months. Denis tells us that when Kherson was under occupation, the school administration suggested that his children should go to a camp in the annexed Crimea, and so the 2 weeks in Yevpatoria, as it was initially planned, extended to many long months. I got to the camp in Yevpatoria.
And how did you like it?
It was okay, only they always made you clean the beach for the summer preparations.
You didn't want to do that.
We were forced. They forced us to wake up to the anthem of the Russian Federation. They forced us to go wherever they told us, so we obeyed. We could not do it any other way. This large family is in the spotlight today. Ina Vertaj and her 3 children arrived in the capital from Berislav, Kherson region, almost a month ago. She has been waiting to see her 16-year-old son Vitaly ever since.
They were supposedly going to go to a campsite, but ended up completely unattended. Not a campsite, as he says, but a concentration camp. The conditions were poor, and the children were given such bad treatment, threats. There were a lot of unpleasant situations.
We had been there for a week and they said, till the new year. We were like, what do you mean? They told us not to expect to see our parents again. You will go to Pskov to an orphanage and they will take care of you there. I used to call my mum crying. She told me, we'll come and get you. But how? There is no money, no possibility. And my mother has a little child. Unreal.
A total of 17 children returned to the Ukrainian-controlled territory on the 22nd of March. All but one of them are residents of the Kherson region.
I liked everything, but sometimes it annoyed me. I didn't want to do anything, but it was okay for me.
In October, 14 children were transported by the Russians to Yevpatoria, to the Luchisti camp. They took another child to the Belogrodsk boarding school in Crimea. One child was taken to Anapa in Russia, and another teenager, Artem Gutorov, from Kupiansk, Kharkiv region, was taken to the so-called LNR, Lugansk People's Republic.
In the morning, they started to evacuate under the pretext of leaving the children unharmed, because Ukraine is coming, so they won't get bombed.
The shelling began. Then the Russian military arrived shouting, pack your bags, and so we left. They put us in a KAMAZ, into a trailer, and we had to sit at gunpoint.
What were you thinking?
That I would never come home again.
The Save Ukraine Foundation, which works to bring children back home, says that after the liberation of the occupied territories, the Russians refused to organize the return of children to Ukrainian-controlled land.
What all these children have in common is the fact that the Russian Federation committed a crime against them. They deported them to their territory for one reason or another. One should understand that these families spent months under occupation and isolation. They terrorized these people all the way through. So it's hard to say that their parents gave the children away voluntarily. I think most of them still don't realize what happened to them and that they could have lost their children forever.
According to the state website Children of War, the Russian authorities have deported more than 16,000 children, and these are only those who have been verified. According to data from open sources in Russia, the number of such children could amount to as many as 700,000. According to the National Information Bureau, 308 minors have been returned home by now. On the 17th of March, the International Criminal Court in The Hague issued an arrest warrant for the Russian President Vladimir Putin and Children's Ombudsman Maria Lvova-Belova. The investigation reported evidence that they had committed a war crime by resorting to the forced deportation of Ukrainian children to Russia.
Thousands of residents of Buryatia have left Russia. They migrated to Mongolia after the start of the war and after mobilization. People are leaving the poorest region of the country either to go to war or escape from war.
The Republic of Buryatia is located in the center of Asia, in the south of eastern Siberia. Lake Baikal's shores touch part of its territory. This Russian region borders Mongolia, a country that is rapidly developing today. From Buryatia, capital Ulan-Ude, to the border is only 230 kilometers. A bus ticket costs just 50 euros. The population of Buryatia was about 1 million people, but when the war with Ukraine started, the Russian government managed to recruit hundreds of local men from the villages of this poor region.
They do not realize that they are going to kill, but they are aware that they are going to risk their lives. They go to some extreme, perhaps they go to die themselves. They don't really think about the fact that they are exchanging their lives for the life of someone innocent and peaceful. They don't think that it's not enough to die themselves. Most likely they will bring death and blood.
According to human rights activist Nadezhda Nizovkina, many Buryats are now ready to openly oppose the war. But activists believe that people are not concerned about how to stop hostilities, but about what will happen in Russia when the war is over. Thousands of residents of Buryatia, fearing mobilization, have decided to leave Russia. Kurbal Dambiev resigned from the municipal library of Ulan-Ude shortly after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. He left from Mongolia in September, when mobilization began. In the capital of Mongolia, Ulaanbaatar, Burba has created an information center to help compatriots who are fleeing the regime of Vladimir Putin.
Our friends the Mongols from Dornod and Khente assisted us in finding a space. They offered this office on the 5th floor on Naiman Shaga Street, which is very popular among our fellow citizens. We pay only utility bills. Here you could get non-financial assistance and items such as flour or clothes. We also collected non-perishable food like rice and powdered milk. And now this is more of an educational and leisure centre.
In December of last year, the influx of people who wanted to flee mobilization decreased. At that time, the center opened free Mongolian courses. Handama Damdinova organized it for Russian immigrants. She was born and raised in Buryatia, but for the last 7 years, she has been living in Ulaanbaatar. Up to 15 people come to classes, mostly men from Buryatia.
It was really scary. This happened very quickly. People came, for example, from Mayaga through that checkpoint which I hadn't even heard about. They even came on foot. All their relatives and friends who have already been living in Mongolia came to help them. I think that this is how help begins and the need for help arises.
Russians without a visa can legally stay in the country for just 30 days. Nowadays, there are many language schools and Mongolian centers for Russians in Ulaanbaatar. Immigrants can get an E3 visa and legally live in Mongolia if they attend such schools. Another way is to go to university. This is what Andrei, a 22-year-old photographer from Ulan-Ude, did. In October, he became a student at the Faculty of Foreign Languages, and now he studies to be a translator. Andrei's mother paid $1,000 for her son's studies.
I heard that they, the Russian army, take everyone everywhere, no matter what degree of fitness for military service you have. I saw that all the men were taken from the villages, even the 50-year-olds. I packed my things and left without thinking for long.
According to Kurbal Dambiev, there are about 5,000 Russians in Mongolia now. 20,000 men have arrived in the country since the end of September. The vast majority entered Mongolia from Buryatia, thus repeating the exodus that happened 100 years ago. Back then, the Buryats fled from the Russian Revolution and the Civil War with all their belongings and livestock. As a result of the war with Ukraine, Buryatia has become one of the leaders of Russian regions in terms of the number of soldiers killed at war. According to official figures, mortality among the military from Buryatia exceeds 60 people per 100,000 in the region. This is almost 10 times more than the average for Russia and 468 times more than in Moscow.
That's all for today. Thank you for watching Eastern Europe Review. We will be back next week with a new source. I'm Alexandra Shapalina. Keep watching TVP World and see you next time.